Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, every good franchise has to start somewhere. 10th enemy has the bomb, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society has the bomb with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how's it going?
It's going great. I recently bought like 200 trash bags.
Okay, yes.
Like trash bag liners or trash can liners.
Okay, for like
for
a
the kitchen.
Gotcha, yeah.
Trash. So
gotcha.
it's medium.
13 gallons?
13 gallons.
Yeah,
We're talking
great.
13 gallons. And I accidentally, unbeknownst to myself.
Scented?
Yes.
Yes.
And what
Is this a
terrible,
Glad- is it a
horrible.
Glad
it's
brand?
not.
Okay.
It's not. It's like an Amazon Basics.
Okay.
And it smells.
Is it like a lavendery smell?
Okay, it might be reaching for lavender.
Okay, yeah.
But what it's
aspirational
what
lavender.
it's achieving is like baby powder,
Yes.
but that is like mixed with baby diaper. Like it smells
it's hard,
bad.
It's hard to divorce those things, especially as
smells
you're putting
bad.
trash in it.
Exactly. So like every time I open, I just don't know what to do because I have like 190 of them left. You know what I mean? I have so many of these. They could be with me for 6 months.
Ever.
I don't know. Yeah,
they're plastic. they could outlive you, Mark.
I know. And now I'm wondering, my God, what is the environmental footprint of what I'm doing? Like, with like, does the smell just make it worse?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
When it's like in the
I don't think the danger,
in the dump.
I don't think the danger is the smell. I think the danger is the microplastics, right? That like leak out of it forever.
Sure, but what are they using to generate the smell?
Oh yeah, sure. Some kind of strange chemical, right? But if a chemical like scorches and burns the dump, like that's okay with me. Let me ask you this: how frequently are you going through one of these trash bags? How long does it take you to like fill one up?
Well, I would say that I'm a habitual. Every night I take the trash out. Like I feel gross if there's like food.
Oh, all right.
Residue in my trash can in my house.
You're putting food in there.
Yeah, I'm putting like.
I see.
Yes. I see your point.
Yeah.
I think I'm just telling on myself because I think it's illegal to do that in California now.
Actually, you are correct.
Yeah,
you should be putting that in the green bin or going to a. Actually, is that that's right? All of California, right?
I think so.
A green bin or like take two. We take our like food waste to the community garden and they compost it.
Yeah.
Because we're very good, and I just want some affirmation.
Yeah, I applaud.
But that is also a hard thing to. We just put it in a plastic bag in the freezer.
Oh,
So it like immediately stop. And we don't have any. We don't eat meat, so there's no like meat garbage that can rot in something like that.
Right.
But every night you take out the trash.
Oh yeah. Oh, I think it's so. I feel kind of gross if there's just like trash in the house.
Well, then just
overnight.
get to these bags then.
I know.
It's still 6 months. It's a
still
long time.
6 months. It's a long. Yeah.
It's a long time.
You
got these bags. Well, if you want to support Mark in his one trash bag every night habit, you can go over to patreon.com/Nintendo Cartridge Society and support us. If you are supporting us at the 8 or 16-bit levels, you get access to our once a month episodes of miniseries like NCS Arcade.
Yes, and in NCS Arcade, Patrick and I are playing games that we've never been before, generally speaking. And this month, for February, we are going to be playing Toe Jam and Earl. Originally released on the Sega Genesis.
Mark, do you find that when you type out Toe Jam and Earl, you start by typing Joe and then backspace, and then typing Toe Jam?
For me, I find that I always type Toe space Jam and Earl.
Right.
But I feel compelled to go back and actually get the nomenclature correct.
Right.
And have like toe and jam be one word.
It's one word, but with the intercapped J.
Yes.
In the middle of it. Yes. And the ampersand is also important.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Toe Jam and Earl. I've been playing this game, and I am very excited to talk about it because what a weirdie. What a weirdie.
What a weirdie. We just talked about Donkey Kong Jr., and Donkey Kong 3, the arcade versions, that you can go check out that episode now.
We've got to record.
We do have to record a listener
feedback episode about that.
That'll come out shortly. That'll be free for everyone to listen to, whether you are giving us money on Patreon or not. Just go over there and follow us for free, and that episode will be in your feed any day now.
Yeah, whenever we do it,
it'll happen. We owe you these things, and we will deliver
next week, probably.
Next week, probably, sure. And then, so check all of that out. Good stuff over there on the Patreon. Also, if you want to email us to get into our Discord, you can. All you got to do is email us Nintendo Cartridge Society
at gmail.com.
And I will send you an invitation to the Discord, and then you can get in there and chat with us as, Nintendo news breaks or refuses to break for weeks at a time, which is sort of, that feels like the cycle we're in right now, right?
Yeah, totally. We have this April goal that we're all like have our eyes on.
The day after April Fool's Day.
The day after April Fool's Day. But who knows? Maybe we'll get like a mini direct or a partner showcase or something any day now.
Indie World. They don't still call it Indie. Do they still call it Indie World Showcase?
And I think because it used to be a Nindy Direct.
It used to be a Nindy
now they
Direct.
call it
That's
an
right.
Indie World
That's
Showcase.
Right. All of these ideas and concepts are just like flitting out of my mind because Nintendo has abandoned them.
It's been a while.
All right, Mark, let's get into our main topic. Let's talk about what generation various franchises started on. That's about it, right? Let's do it. Okay, so this is well, let's go with the prompt first.
Yeah.
We got a message on Patreon, which you should feel free to use to get in touch with us. Also, you can email us, Nintendo Cartridge Society
at gmail.com.
But we got a message from Tux DC. Tux says, I was just thinking about what new IP Nintendo could start with the Switch 2. It made me wonder what other IPs have been successful from the Nintendo 64 on. The only really recent one I could think of is Splatoon. I also think since the Switch 2 design is so iterative, maybe they will be more willing to bring new IP in to feel fresh. And we thought, yeah, great point. What a great topic. There are so many. Nintendo has a lot of different franchises, and from which a lot of different IP has spun off. That everything starts somewhere, right? And I don't think we always do a great job of like categorizing where these things come from. But that'll be a nice little bit of history for us to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Tux DC. We always love when we get episode suggestions.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
I mean, if you have something that you would like to hear us discuss, like shoot us an email, hit us up on Patreon.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Let us know. So we went about creating a list of franchises.
We have a list.
We have a list of franchises and the console on which they started.
Right. And this gets complicated.
Yeah. Okay. So there's some parameters.
Right.
There's some things to keep in mind as we go through this list.
And there's nothing that we love more than throwing down some rules.
Oh, we love rules.
We love them so much.
We really do.
Because we love the rules because the rules are going to tell us, what we can't do.
Exactly.
What's not allowed.
Yeah, what's going to slap our hands if we try to do it.
And sometimes...
I mean, we are bad boys.
We are bad little boys. Sometimes we will endure those slaps, however.
Yeah.
Because it'll be fun.
Exactly.
Right.
So here are some parameters for the list. Nothing from the arcade, the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the Game Boy.
We are counting those as the Genesis generations. By which I mean...
yeah, not the Sega Genesis.
I should not have said that. That was so bad. That was so
Mega
bad.
Drive generations.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
This is the origin generation. These are the primordial generation.
Yeah, we're saying anything that was created during those consoles or like the arcade, they just don't count. It's like the first of basically everything.
Right. Like Genesis. Why did Sega do that? It's not their first console.
Do you think like because the band was popular at the time, right? Like, do you think that they're like, oh, we're being cool, we're being
Yeah,
hip,
sure.
we're calling it? I mean, it sounds good.
It's better than calling it the Police.
It is better than calling
Right?
it the Police. Sega the Police.
It wouldn't be good.
It wouldn't be
I
good.
wouldn't buy it.
Would have aged poorly. Okay, so nothing from that generation. And Tux DC, in his suggestions, thought about starting from the Nintendo 64 on.
Yes.
But we're going to start with the Super Nintendo
Yes.
and the Game Boy Advance.
Some big franchises starting there, right?
Yes.
On Super NES, yeah.
Yeah, on Super NES. But this also means that like we're not going to bring up Fire Emblem because that started on the on the Famicom.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have to take a global approach to this, right?
Right.
So games like Fire Emblem, like Famicom Detective Club, are going to be at home on like Advance Wars,
Right, exactly.
like all of these things that started on like Famicom.
So
or
we're
whatever.
just not going to talk about them.
We're just not going to talk about them.
Second parameter, must have been released in more than one region.
Yes,
So it was like a US exclusive, a Japan exclusive, a Europe exclusive. We're not talking about it.
that's right.
Spin-offs of existing franchises are not on here with some exceptions. Like, for example, Triforce Heroes isn't its own entry.
Which, hurt as that may, we're not going to talk. Look, there has to be one episode where we don't talk about The Legend of Zelda Triforce Heroes.
Except we just did.
Except
so it's
we
not
just
this episode.
Did. But like also important here that like some spin-offs become their own franchises.
Yes.
And those will be the exceptions.
Yes. Anything for the Super Scope or any other peripheral specific games, not on here.
For the most part.
For the most part.
We have one Switch one that I'm like, we have to talk about.
No,
maybe two. We have a couple.
No sports games, with some exceptions.
Right. Like Mario sports games, you bet we're going to talk about those. Mm-hmm. And also sport is broad, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Puzzle games, no.
Right.
Licensed titles, get out of here.
Right.
No eShop exclusive titles, so sorry to Rusty's Real Deal Baseball, Snipper Clips, Flip Wars, etc.
Right.
Not going to be on here.
Nintendo Badge Arcade.
And finally, and most importantly, the rules only apply when we want them to, because we know
yes.
a attempted franchise starter when we see it.
Yes. So some of these games that we will talk about are definitely attempts at starting a new franchise, and sometimes they work, and sometimes they do not.
So I think what we're going to do is, or what I'm proposing we do is we go through the list, we talk about each of the entries, and I think we can decide, because I think there's some on here that are borderline, and so I think we can decide, let's take it off the list. Like, we don't have to consider it.
Right. And what happens with this list? We're just like canonizing it as like, these are the important.
Yeah, I don't think we're like, I don't think we're ranking them or anything like that.
We're not ranking, right.
No.
This is just a conversation.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of times we don't feel confident enough in what we're talking about to not have the structure of a ranking or putting into tiers or whatever. But here, confident.
Yeah, no net.
No net. Nothing but net.
No, the opposite of that.
Okay, so all net?
All no net.
The ball doesn't go in?
Yeah.
It just hits the net. Okay, great. All right, so let's start with the Super NES and discuss some of the franchises that started there. Do you want to just like go down the list of what we have and make some cuts first?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's do that.
So we'll just kind of go back and forth. So F-Zero.
I think that, Pilot Wings.
Yeah, and Pilot Wings as well absolutely stays. Mario Paint.
There's an argument for it.
But
it's like circuitous.
Right. That like, is it a franchise? Right. And like, there's the Nintendo Art Academy thing on is that what it's called?
Art Academy is a franchise that started on the DS. You're talking about like the Nintendo 64 DD ones?
Yes.
Was it like Mario's Art Studio?
I think that's right. So like that is like the closest thing we have to a direct sequel. And then the Mario Maker games have a lot of DNA from Mario Paint, but it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe that doesn't really count as a franchise starter.
Yeah, I think so. And I feel like part of what makes this conversation so interesting is that I think sometimes, Nintendo, it feels like very intentional that this could be the start of something, but also Nintendo is not foreign to just making one or two of a thing.
They love doing two.
And just being content.
Right.
So I think it's very possible that they weren't like, ooh, Mario Paint, this is going to be our new franchise that we're going to do forever. Right. They might have just been like, here's a cool thing we have for the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
And like, not intending to ever follow it up.
Right.
So where are we falling on Mario
I mean,
Paint?
let's just leave it because
Okay.
it is still it's a Mario game. It has a lot of like its DNA shows up lots of other places. So like let's leave it there. And also, there's no downside to leaving it
Yeah,
there.
that's right.
Um,
Super Mario Kart.
unbelievable that there's a place where Super Mario Kart has to start, and it's not like in the primordial soup that is the NES, right? Because it is such a part of what makes Nintendo a powerhouse now. Obviously, this stays on the list.
Yes.
Next up is Star Fox. Kind of arguably a dead franchise at this point, but like was a franchise, is still like iconography closely associated with Nintendo.
Next one.
Yes.
Stunt Race FX.
Right. A favorite of the Mitchell family.
A favorite of the Mitchell family.
Right.
Does it count as like, should it be included on the list of franchises?
Right.
Or possible franchises?
I mean,
it is a list of new,
yeah,
like,
new IP.
New IP,
right.
yeah. New intellectual property.
That's right. We meet these cars with big eyes on them.
Yep.
Mouths?
Yeah, no, I don't think they had mouths.
Okay, so they're not like the cars from the like Chevron commercials?
No, they're not.
Oh, and they're not like the cars from Cars?
They're not like, neither of
great.
those.
Or from planes. Okay, so what do you think? I feel like this is, if it doesn't even feel like an aborted series, right? It feels like a one-off game that they did.
Yeah, if anything, it's like if you wanted to make a weird franchise framing around it, it would be the FX chip.
Right.
Where they were like, oh, here's another thing that we can do with the FX chip that is cool. It's like these polygonal cars that have eyes but no mouths.
Right. But and like specifically it is like the using the Super FX chip to render 3D graphics on the Super NES, right? Because the Super FX chip did a handful of other things, right? Like that's part of what makes Yoshi's Island possible, with like the very big sprites, and they like kind of like shrink and grow, and there's like some of the just like things falling into the foreground. All of that is Super FX chip related, but is so different from what Star Fox and Stunt Race FX do. Right. I say we don't count it.
I think that's right.
All right. Next up is Donkey Kong Country. I think inarguably its own franchise.
I think so too.
It extends into the Wii and Wii U and all that kind of stuff. So I think it counts.
Killer Instinct.
Weird to sort of, although. So the first time we see it on a home console is on the Super NES, but does the arcade version predate it?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
I think it does. I think they were mostly trying to bring our arcade experiences home to the to consoles, and because Rare was making them, that they.
You're right. Okay,
right
I just looked
it
up. The original Killer Instinct released in arcades in 1994 and didn't release on the Super Nintendo and Game Boy until 1995. So I think that is to be removed from the list.
Yes, fantastic. We've got one more on here, but before we do, I'm noticing an absence here, and I wonder if it was intentional on your part when you put the list together. Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island.
It was, because this is one where I didn't really know how to handle it. So the way I handled it is that on the Nintendo 64, I have Yoshi's Story.
Okay.
And it's the same sort of thing as like, does Super Mario Land 3 6 golden coins count as the origin of Wario? Or is it not until
But Super Mario Land 3 Wario Land does.
Oh, because Super Mario Land 2 is 6 golden coins.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
But so I guess the argument that I'll put forth for Yoshi's Island is that the original Yoshi's Island in Japan was just called Yoshi's Island. It's not Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island.
Are you sure it's not the reverse, and that in Japan it was Super Mario World 2?
No, because that's what it is in North America.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'm fairly certain. And this is a almost impossible thing to look up right now. But what do you think? Like, we need to talk about the origin of the Yoshi style games at some point here,
Right.
because this is definitely a post um, Famicom and Game Boy creation.
Yeah. I I think I could go either way. I feel like if we want to have like Yoshi's Island count as the beginning of the Yoshi franchise,
Mm-hmm.
I can see the argument for it. You play as Yoshi. It's such a different game from Super Mario World. Like uh
Yeah,
so yeah, I think that's totally fine if we want to do that. And then I will remove Yoshi's Story from
very good.
the Nintendo 64 list.
Okay, now I'm looking at a photograph of a Super Famicom Japanese version of Yoshi's
Okay,
Island.
perfect.
And of course, the sticker is in Japanese, so I can't read it.
You know what? I think it's fine. We made
Okay.
a decision.
We made a decision. That's
Yeah.
right. And that's really all I wanted is
That's
for us
all-
to
yeah.
land on a decision. And then, of course, the last franchise maybe is Super Mario RPG: Legend of the Seven Stars.
Yeah, what to do
What
here?
to do here, Mark?
Because it in some ways launched the Super Mario RPG franchises.
Yes.
And like we've talked about before, Paper Mario and Mario and Luigi series are both like
Yes.
brother properties to Super Mario RPG.
Yes.
So you could say that that's the franchise, but then they also branch off and I think become their own franchises.
They definitely become their own franchises. Yes, for sure. So like, yeah, it I mean, and like this is just like in the grand tradition of Nintendo, where it's like the first Mario game is a Donkey Kong game,
Right.
Like all this kind of stuff, where you're like, that's a spin-off of this. It doesn't make any sense. So I don't know. The thing is, they did release a remake of Mario RPG on Switch recently, but they haven't made like a new game. So yeah, I don't know. What do you want to do with this one, Mark?
My gut says is we keep it.
Okay, let's keep it.
And that it is like the mother to the entire like Mario RPG franchise.
Right.
And even though it didn't get a direct follow-up, I still feel like it's the like the root of the tree.
I agree.
And that these just became different branches that like I think count as their own franchises, but I think it's fair to count Super Mario RPG as a
great as a franchise
like a
start.
franchise.
Also, you said the word mother at this point, so I just want to recognize Mother or Earthbound Beginnings starts on the Famicom, right? So we are not discussing that here,
right?
Okay. Well, so is there anything that we can draw from the sort of collection of new franchises started on the Super NES? F-Zero, Pilot Wings, Mario Paint, Super Mario Kart, Star Fox, Donkey Kong Country, Mario RPG, and Yoshi's Island.
It's interesting that on the one hand, it's a lot of new franchises, but on the other hand, I'm actually kind of surprised at how few are here in the Super Nintendo era.
Sure. Yeah, that is true, because Super Nintendo does well in a lot of ways. Super NES was like we've talked about this before, the sort of like realization of a lot of what they wanted to do on NES, but just needed more power, right? Like that's in a very like Tim Allen Tool Time kind of way. More power. That like Link to the Past is like what Zelda was meant to be. It's the first time it actually gets to achieve that. Super Metroid is the first time that Metroid gets to achieve that. Super Mario World, look, no shade to the previous Mario games, but like Super Mario World is a perfect little package, right? And that is sort of like reflected also in third-party stuff, right? Like Mega Man X, Super Castlevania 4, all this kind of stuff. The Final Fantasy games just like get great on this system.
Yeah, that's true. And so maybe that is part of the reason why we don't see so many new IP or new franchises.
Yeah.
Because
they're busy perfecting the old ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's also interesting to me to see like coming out of it, I would say out of F-Zero, Pilot Wings, Mario Paint, Super Mario Kart, Star Fox, Donkey Kong Country, Super Mario RPG, and Yoshi's Island, the ones that really persist are Mario Kart, arguably Donkey Kong Country.
I think definitely Yoshi though.
Yoshi and Super Mario RPG. So like
yeah,
they have it's like half of them.
and with Mario RPG having totally morphed into like
two different
two
franchises
different
at this point.
franchises. But yeah, and then like Donkey Kong Country being like sort of a soft yes. Like we've discussed this, that like there hasn't been a new Donkey Kong Country game in like a decade.
Right. And it's like, I feel like, and maybe it's just the
To be
like
fair, there hasn't been a new Mario Kart in like a decade without a tour, I guess.
right,
counts,
but
yeah.
like Mario Kart continues to sell crazy every year.
Yeah.
But it's just like I feel like maybe the Super Nintendo is the console, that and like the Nintendo 64 is like the console of the millennials. And
Sure,
so
yes,
and
I'll
you know,
agree.
I wonder if like, because people have been asking for like a new F-Zero for what? Basically like 20 years.
Sure.
And so that's like prime millennial territory, like people that grew up with the Super Nintendo. And so I wonder if that's maybe also another reason why some of these series, like I know they brought back F-Zero as 99, but we haven't seen a new F-Zero game. We haven't seen a new Star Fox for a while, and every time they've tried to make a new Star Fox for the past 15 years, it's always been met with like middling response. And I wonder if some of
that is because they did put out 3 Star Fox games over the course of 15 months, and
Right.
they're all bad.
they were all bad.
Zero Guard and 2.
But like Donkey Kong Country, another example. I don't know. I just feel like maybe the wave of like Nintendo targeting millennials has crested,
Yeah.
and that we will begin to see more coming from like the later Nintendo 64 or the GameCube era. We've already seen this with like GameCube.
Totally. Well, and with like another code, not that that's a big hit,
But I know what you mean,
Switch,
yeah.
But like, yeah, that's we're seeing a lot of that sort of like manifest now, where like, you know, you never count a Nintendo property out ever, right? Like Pilot Wings, for example. There's Pilot Wings and there's Pilot Wings 64, so it seemed like they were on like a roll with it, and then they were like, nah, really not again until Pilot Wings Resort on the 3DS, right?
Right.
So like, you know, they'll let something kind of obscure sit and rest for a long time, and then bring it back out and be like, here's like kind of another one. I don't know. We're not going to revisit it again.
Here's Emio the Smiling Man.
Here's Emio the Smiling Man. Here's Kid Icarus Uprising, which we'll talk about. Like all of these things where it just like, why,
Right.
why this, why now? And sometimes there'll be, you know, exciting pops for Nintendo freaks like you and I, and sometimes they'll reach some, you know, mainstream success. But you know, it's all like kind of a crapshoot. I do think it's interesting to see a Mario RPG on here, just because the Super NES was such the home to Square Enix's killer RPGs, right? I mentioned the Final Fantasy games, Secret of Mana, Secret of Evermore, that one's just for me, and Chrono Trigger, right? Being like these huge Japanese role-playing games, and then Square Enix making this game for Nintendo to publish with Nintendo characters,
Yeah.
that then like births its own, you know, twin franchises. Just an interesting little like, it's a sign of like the times on the system, and like really seems like resultant from what was popular not within the Nintendo tent, but from without.
Yeah. That's a good point. I feel like it's hard to draw really like broad conclusions until we go through.
I just did one.
No. But I'm saying from like, how was the Super Nintendo for
Right.
birthing new franchises? Like, I would say pretty successful, but
to a point. Right.
but we haven't gone through any of the other
What are we comparing it to?
generations
Yes.
to actually like see, because the Nintendo 64, which is up next, has more like has a greater quantity, but I don't know how it'll all shake out.
I
as
think we're
far
gonna start
as-
eliminating things here pretty quick.
Yeah.
but let's talk about it. Let's move on to the Nintendo 64. Starting with 1080 snowboarding. Now, Mark, you said no sports.
I said no sports, but this felt
You meant like vanilla
unique.
sports. This is an extreme sport.
well. This one you can't like trace back
yeah,
to the NES with baseball or
Right.
tennis. You
Right.
know, snowboarding was new for the Nintendo 64, and
I tried to play 1080 snowboarding on the Nintendo Switch Online. Impenetrable. Like, can't figure it out. I can't do anything in the game.
I haven't played this for so long. Really, the one that I put the most time into was the GameCube sequel. But yeah, like there were multiple of these, but it doesn't feel like a Nintendo franchise play.
Yes, I agree with that. It's just such a weird space for Nintendo to be occupying, right? And like there's another one that we have on the list, like lower, that you already ejected, which is Wave Race 64, because there was in fact a Game Boy Wave Race, but that feels like it falls in the same bucket where it's like, here's an extreme sports thing. The people in it aren't real, but like they're not fantastical in any way.
It feels legacy to me of like Nintendo's still in this transition
Yes.
of, well, like during the Famicom and NES era, we were publishing sports titles. We create, we made golf games and baseball games and
Ice hockey.
not like Mario
Right.
sports games. We just made straight up sports games. And the Nintendo 64 feels like the last generation to me that they were continuing to try to fill that space.
Yeah, totally.
And now I think like when we think like a new Nintendo franchise, it has colorful characters and really identifiable, like gameplay mechanics.
Yes.
But they hadn't really made that transition yet.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. So do you want to keep it or do you want to lose it?
I think I feel fine losing it.
Okay.
But interesting to talk about.
Yes, for sure. Next up on the list, we got Banjo-Kazooie. Now, of course, this was during the period where Rare was a mostly owned partner, by mostly owned by Nintendo, development partner that was making a ton of games for them. Sometimes they were featuring Nintendo characters, as in Donkey Kong 64 and Diddy Kong Racing, and sometimes it was something brand new like Banjo-Kazooie. I mostly think of Banjo-Kazooie now as a Rare property and not as a Nintendo property. And Microsoft's done an okay job of reclaiming it as like something that appears on their platforms. What do you think?
I think it's fair to call it like a franchise that was birthed on the Nintendo 64.
You didn't like saying that.
Well, the reason why I was kind of like hesitant is, like, even back then, did people associate it as a Nintendo franchise? Or, like you said, was it a Rare? Because by this point, Rare had made somewhat of a name for itself.
Right, with the Donkey Kong
Country
games,
series. And yes, they were published by Nintendo. I don't know, maybe it's my, revisionist history looking back on it, where now it's like a Microsoft franchise that's also dormant. But so I think it counts even if it's not like a Nintendo property anymore.
All right, well let's leave it there. I do think it's interesting, just as we're on the subject of like, why were we so aware of these things being Rare properties? And like, you think back to Donkey Kong, that like a Donkey Kong Country, that you would go into some of those like mini game rooms and you'd have to spell out the word Rare.
And it had a cool logo at the start, where it's like wireframe and everything.
Probably those logos in like all of these games, though, right?
Right, that's true.
But it's just kind of crazy that Rare was like, I don't know, we just like put our name in it. It's part of the gameplay, I guess.
And they'd been partners with like Nintendo, or working on Nintendo hardware for so long. Yeah, I don't know. That is interesting. I wonder why as a kid. But you're right. It was probably because it was everywhere. They just put their name everywhere.
Okay, so moving on to the next game.
We have a couple of other Rare developed titles that I don't really know if they should count as, they are new IP, but I don't know if they count as,
they're probably not franchise
launch pads, like Blast Corp and Jet Force Gemini.
Right. I feel comfortable striking both those from the list. They're both like interesting games. Blast Corp's more than Jet Force Gemini, which you and I played for an episode of NCS Arcade. And spoiler, if you're not on the Patreon, we didn't really care for it.
Nope.
Game is tough to play. And we will get to another one of those in just a second. But next game on our list is Custom Robo.
This is another one where I didn't really know where to put it, because it didn't release outside of Japan until the GameCube era. So it started on the Nintendo 64, doesn't release outside of one region until GameCube. But we can talk about it here because I don't really know that much about it.
Great. I mean, in that case, like, why even talk about it? Because I also don't really know anything about Custom Robo on the... Was it custom on the GameCube?
Yeah, I think it was like Custom Robo, some other word.
Sure. Okay. And then Chibi Robo later.
Different franchises. Different franchises.
Why do we have so many Robos?
This is like an action RPG series.
All right. Well then, great. I know even less about it than I thought I did.
So, Custom Robo. It exists. It's out there. We haven't played it.
And we're done talking about it.
We're done talking about it.
Right.
GoldenEye.
Mark, you said no licensed games.
I did say that,
You
didn't
said
I?
no licensed games. Right from the jump, you said, Patrick, one of the rules here, no licensed games. I believe you said get them out of here. What do you think? Obviously, this was developed by Rare and was a huge part of the Nintendo 64 and, sort of like birthed a genre of first-person James Bond shooters that we would see repeated on not Nintendo platforms and then once again on a Wii decades later. But like, is this the start of a Nintendo franchise? I think the answer is
the answer is no. Yeah, you're right.
Mark, did you see this story recently that like it came out that when they were remaking GoldenEye for the Wii, that the Broccoli family, who runs the James Bond IP, wanted them to not include guns?
Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
How would that have even worked?
What would the gameplay have been?
Yeah.
Are you just like sneaking around having drinks?
I mean, they did have like the slap mode, right? Where you could play without guns.
Slappers only. Yeah.
Slappers only. I don't know this for sure, that they pronounce it broccoli.
Okay.
I think.
That's fine. I'm gonna call them the Broccoli.
Which I think is right, because can't you like trace back the origin of broccoli to them?
Okay, so there is some like ambiguity here as to whether they are, and we'll talk about it in the Discord, I'm sure. So like,
help us out.
But the family's like fortune comes from like dealing in broccoli.
Okay,
and there's some debate as to whether the name of the food originates from the family.
I see.
Or the other way around.
I see.
But I mean, like, needless to say, they are intrinsically like entwined, and like the food broccoli is directly responsible for that family running James Bond. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes sense to me. Did you also see there was an article in like the Hollywood Reporter or something about how the family, because Amazon owns MGM now, and MGM like owns the distribution rights or something to the James Bond films.
Right. And they've always partnered with the Broccoli's. First with Cubby Broccoli for a while, and then Cubby died, and now Barbara is...
Cubby Broccoli doesn't sound like a real person. That sounds fake.
He is.
But now that part of the reason why there's been no movement on a new James Bond movie is because Amazon wants like, we want like a spin-off series set in the world of James Bond for Amazon Prime, and the Broccoli's family's like, no, we're not doing any of that.
Right. We just put out like one movie every 3 years or whatever. We get someone who's older than the last guy who quit because he was too old, and we make him do 7 movies. That's what we do. We're the Broccolis, or the Broccolis. We may or may not have invented broccoli, or it may or may not have invented us. We don't know. Also, it's only been 4 years since the last one came out.
Has it really only been 4 years?
In 2021, right?
I guess that makes sense. Yeah. But even if they started now, it'd be another 2 years before it was released.
Yeah, that is true. And they stopped making that movie like 6 years ago, right? No Time to Die. I'm saying.
Probably, yeah.
Mario
Golf.
This Mario Golf is the next one. Yeah.
This violates the no sports rule because it does feel like this really became its own distinct series.
Absolutely, yes. Origin of Waluigi, because Wario needs a doubles partner.
That's tennis, right?
Yes, I'm sorry. That is the next item on the list.
It's all the same.
Let's do them together.
Golf and tennis.
Golf and tennis, yes. Mario Golf, Mario Tennis. They both count as starting here. As does Mario Party.
This is a big one.
Uh-huh.
We've just seen Super Mario Party Jamboree.
You did it.
Just continue to sell
crazy
amounts. And
it starts here. And Nintendo 64 does a really good job of supporting this thing by putting 3 of them out. Nintendo 64 was not a going concern for all that long. 1996 to 2001. 5 years, and they put out 3 of these games.
Yeah.
Just
pretty good showing.
Mm-hmm.
Paper Mario.
Yeah. I mean, undeniably, this is the place where Paper Mario starts, and then it has a long and storied career. Sometimes being good, sometimes not, and always like sort of reinventing itself. So yeah, cool that it starts on Nintendo 64.
I have 2 here that are like Pokemon spin-offs.
Okay.
And I don't really know what to do with them. So there's Pokemon Snap, which for the longest time was not a franchise,
right,
until Super Pokemon Snap. What was that called?
It's called New Pokemon
New
Snap.
Pokemon Snap.
Mhm.
Was released on Switch, and then I put Pokemon Stadium here, but I want to take it off. I don't think Pokemon Stadium should count.
Sure. Just there are 3 of them though, right? Or there were 2 in North America, but 3 in Japan. And why do you? Because it is like in some ways it is just another way to interact with the Pokemon games that you're playing on Game Boy. But like they have their own like kind of story mode and stuff. It's not like a full Pokemon, you know, mission or whatever. But like
Yeah, I guess you're right. So are you saying that we should leave it on the list?
I don't know. It's so weird because like they just appear here and then never again.
Right. And ultimately, I think what's interesting about this is kind of like looking at which ones have persisted
Right.
and which ones haven't. And so maybe it's worth keeping Pokemon Stadium on the list because it was a franchise.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just a franchise that never left the Nintendo 64.
Now, but is this because one of the other rules is no spin-offs, right? And like, is this sort of like the quintessential Pokemon spin-off?
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate rule is we know it when we see it.
Right.
So
Here's the problem. I don't think we know.
Well, we know. Here's things we know.
Yeah.
Has 3 games.
Uh-huh.
Didn't make it off the Nintendo 64.
Right.
I think if something has 3 games, it's fair to call it
Okay.
like
Let's leave it there.
a new IP, a
Let's
new
leave it there.
franchise.
Next up is Sin and Punishment, which is Japan exclusive at this point. We don't see this game until like the Wii Virtual Console.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's when Sin and Punishment 2 was released,
Right.
making it a franchise.
Yeah. Weird. Nintendo does weird things.
But can you really call it? I mean, it like after the fact became a franchise. You know, they like reversed canon to make it a
Right,
franchise
right.
by making a second one.
But that's the Famicom Detective Club story.
But even Famicom Detective Club was 2 games.
That's a great point.
You're
right.
And then
You're right.
The third one made it a trilogy. This one is like, is Sin and Punishment a franchise? I mean, I guess it's 2 games.
Yeah.
I would call it an unsuccessful franchise.
Here's the thing: is that like also like on the worldwide stage, it's not a franchise until Wii when both the games come out.
Yeah.
So like, I almost want to take Sin and Punishment and put it on the Wii. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Just like we are not, and just like spoiler alert here, we're not talking about Animal Crossing as a Nintendo 64 game, even though Animal Forest comes out on the Nintendo 64 in Japan. We're going to talk about it as a GameCube game.
Yes.
Right. So I think that's I think some of our justification here has to be, you know, our America centric like view of the Nintendo market, because that's where we
how we experience
live our lives. Yeah. So okay, it's already been moved. And then the last game I guess that we have on the list here is Super Smash Brothers. Sort of incredible. Again, to think that like there was a place where Super Smash Brothers needed to start.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. Looking at the Nintendo 64, the ones we have left are
We eliminated a lot here, I feel like.
Banjo-Kazooie, Custom Robo, Mario Golf, Mario Tennis, Mario Party, Paper Mario, Pokemon Snap, Pokemon Stadium, and Super Smash Brothers. You know, a lot of what we said about Sin and Punishment could apply to Pokemon Snap, where it's only a franchise, knowing what we know now. But like,
no, not true, because Pokemon Snap?
Snap.
Yeah, that's true, except that the original Pokemon Snap was available everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it is. I think it's still. I mean, it's such a low impact
Yeah,
franchise.
for sure.
Like I think the original Pokemon Snap has its like defenders and people that really had fun playing it. But for the most part, like new Pokemon Snap is like kind of a non-entity. It was like a fun weekend at best. But yeah.
I can't remember if I finished this list, but Pokemon Stadium and Super Smash Brothers. So
Yes,
like
I believe
looking
you
at the
did.
Nintendo
Mhm.
64 ones, it kind of like the Super Nintendo, it's like half and half. Like Mario Golf, Mario Tennis, Mario Party, Paper Mario, and Super Smash Brothers.
A lot of Mario.
A lot of Mario.
Right. And a fair amount of Pokemon too, right? Where it's just like, here is where our bread is buttered. Find a way to make more Pokemon things. Find a way to make more Mario things.
But I feel like those are the ones that, like the Mario ones, plus Super Smash Brothers, which arguably, it's a Kirby game, but
Right.
arguably feature, like, it does feature Mario.
Several Mario characters, yes.
But those are, those are the ones that make it out of the Nintendo 64 era. So it's like
Totally. Yes.
on both
You're
the
right.
Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64, they're batting basically 500,
Right. Right. All right.
which honestly is not
Pretty
is not
good.
bad
Pretty
for
good, yeah.
like trying to create new franchises.
I mean, just like from right there, the golf and tennis are like every generation that has one, right? Like
Perennials.
yes,
So is
exactly.
Smash Brothers, you just expect it.
Yes, and Party is even more than that. Where
Yeah.
you're like, we could have one on this platform, or we could have three. We have three on Switch. So, and it's just like, yep, that's fine. It doesn't feel like it's overcrowding the market or whatever. Like people buy them. Are you ready, Mark, to move on to the Game Boy Advance?
Yeah. Yes. This one has some tricky ones in it.
Yes, it does.
That we'll have to decide what to do with.
Okay, starting with DK Donkey Kong, that is King of Swing.
It did have a sequel on the
It did
DS.
have a sequel, yes. And that one is called Jungle Climber.
Yes.
Yeah. And arguably, these are sequels to Clue Clue Land.
Which
yes.
started on the NES.
Uh-huh.
So maybe we just take it off the list.
And is available to play on Nintendo Switch Online.
Which we know for sure.
We know that for sure. And has been forever. Yeah, let's pull it off the list. Because also, who cares?
Who wants to talk about King of Swing? We did it a few weeks ago
with
Donkey Kong Villains.
Yeah, we're fine. Next up, Drill Dozer.
So this is a Game Freak developed game that is published by Nintendo. And there are some of these that I didn't put on the list. Like I didn't put Harmonite from the 3DS on the list.
Right.
And so maybe we shouldn't count these.
It's also the only time that this game, like, there's no Drill Dozer 2.
It does. Yeah, this one doesn't feel like they are trying to set up a franchise, like a going concern.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
well, and like the Game Freak and HAL developed like one-offs. Like those feel perfectly at home to me, and they're like not actually a, like what's that game called? The Village from Game Freak on Switch. Little Town Hero.
Yes, Little Town Hero.
I got there. Called it The Village. That's not what it's called at all. But yeah, like that's not a franchise starter.
Right.
We know it when we see it. That's that rule in play right now. Next up, we've got Golden Sun.
They tried.
They sure did.
Like, I think this is an erstwhile franchise.
I think so too. They obviously made two of them on GBA, and then they made a DS one as well. And like, I don't know. Golden Sun is one of those games where like I think any moment they could announce a new Golden Sun for Switch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, it sells 800,000 copies.
And they regret it.
Yep.
And it is never spoken of again.
But JRPG, just it's its own thing.
Yep.
Developed by Camelot, who also made the like golf and tennis game.
And I feel like Golden Sun is a franchise that has a hardcore fan base.
Absolutely.
That
yes.
always, wants a new game, is excited whatever Golden Sun is referenced. But so a franchise for sure, a new IP for sure.
Speaking of having a rabid fan base who's excited every time the franchise is mentioned, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga.
What is your temperature
Yes.
on how Brothership did?
Like sales wise?
Or just like,
I think it broke 1 million, but I think it's like a pretty soft, like it didn't outsell Echoes of Wisdom, for example, like another kind of like softer game from the end of last year. And I think it's tough even to know like where it like I think fans of the series are happy with it, generally speaking. And they have been kind of grumpy about the re-releases and like the other like later games in the series. So I don't know. I think it's like kind of a return to form.
Yeah,
but it's
I wonder
always
if it
just
did
like
well
in the
enough.
shadows kind of game anyway.
That's true. I wonder if it did well enough for them to make another one.
Yeah, I don't know. But definitely starts here.
Mario versus Donkey Kong.
Yes. Great. Another one where it's like, is this a spin-off of Donkey Kong 94, which is itself a spin-off of the original Donkey Kong, which it wasn't in itself the first Mario game? What is this? What is Mario versus Donkey Kong? And also, all of the games in the franchise after this have a radically different gameplay style in that they start leaning on minis and the sort of like indirect control of like tapping things to activate them and then like letting them walk around on their own. But this is absolutely the start of the series, right?
Right, and I think it became its own thing, even
Yeah.
if you can trace the origin back to the original Donkey Kong.
Yes, I agree.
All right, I have Napoleon on here,
Mark has Napoleon on
which
here,
is
so explain yourself, young
which
man.
is a strategy
Mhm.
RPG that was released in Japan and France.
Interesting choice, Nintendo.
So I don't know if we count it.
I say we don't count it.
I can't
obviously we don't
imagine
see
that they
any
were
sequels. Right.
planning to make like a Napoleon 2, make a whole thing out of it.
All right. Next up, we've got Rhythm Heaven, which is still a Japan exclusive at this point, right? It's not
Right,
until
it's not until the DS era.
right that we get it outside of Japan. So should we discuss it in the DS era?
Sure, that's what we did with Sin and Punishment.
Mm-hmm.
So
And what we did with Animal Crossing without seeing it on
Yes,
the list.
that's
in the first
right.
place. Yes.
And then finally we have WarioWare, which gets its start here. And again, kind of a spin-off, but so different that
No,
can be its own thing.
It's so different. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is perfect, and is another thing that they like will revisit kind of whenever and however they want, right? We got 2 of these games on Switch, for example, and they're
Yeah.
both like sort of crazy reinventions of the game. So WarioWare starts there. We have trimmed the GBA list down to almost nothing here, Mark.
Yeah, we only have 4 games on here now. Golden Sun, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, and WarioWare. Also, the GBA, not around for that long.
Yeah, great point.
And so much of the GBA library, when I was going through the list, is re-releases of Famicom and Nintendo games.
Yes.
And re-release, and then like reimaginings,
Super
like the
NES
Super
games too,
Mario,
right.
yeah, like the Super Mario Advance games. Like so much of that library is just putting previously console games now available on handheld.
Right.
Also, the GBA wasn't around for that long.
Yeah, and it also just had like Pokemon games too, right?
But I would say WarioWare, and I know we had the remake of Mario vs. Donkey Kong, and you got Brothership.
I know it seems like it has like for how few new things it had, that like those 3 things are pretty impactful now.
Yeah.
The only like not really present in the conversation now is Golden Sun, and even still, Nintendo made like
It got
kind
3
of
games.
Yes, but I'm saying they had like a big marketing beat around them releasing on
Yeah, that's right.
the NSO, which is cool.
So that brings us to the GameCube.
It does bring us to the GameCube, releasing the same year as the Game Boy Advance, and starting with Animal Crossing. Of course, I mentioned before, originally released on Nintendo 64 in Japan, but comes out worldwide on GameCube. Obviously, this is a franchise starter, and it's a huge deal.
Yes.
May not have been a huge deal at the time, but it is certainly now.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Pikmin type thing where they really nurtured it.
Yes.
Like, the GameCube game came out, but I would say Wild World, the DS game that was the first time you could visit other people's islands, was like pretty successful. City Folk was
Less
kind of like a
successful.
step
the
back.
Wii one, right?
But then New Leaf
was huge.
New Leaf was huge,
On
and they
3DS,
really like
yeah.
nurtured that one on 3DS. And then, of course, the most recent one is
exploded the world.
exploded the world. And yeah, so they really, I don't know, kind of like, I mean, how responsible are they for the success of the
Right.
New Horizons?
Right. But New Leaf was very successful and had the Happy Home Designer like separate like sequel game that you could just like decorate animals' houses.
And that big update for Amiibo.
That's right. And so like all of that was like sort of in the mix, and like there was just a lot of like hype around the game. Like I think there's something that happens in video games where like one entry in the series is good and like very good, and the fans of the series are excited about it, and like they start like talking and get like other people interested in the series like as a concept. And I think that's where Animal Crossing was prior to the release of New Horizons. And then it comes out at the absolute perfect time, the beginning of the pandemic, and so like it's a combination of things that like it was ready to pop anyway, and then came out into the perfect environment for it that made it the second most successful game on Switch,
and now is like a pillar Nintendo franchise.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Something that does not meet that threshold is Chibi Robo.
Right, which again, we don't understand.
Yeah, I've never played a game
Yeah.
in the Chibi Robo series.
And I think we probably never will.
But there were multiple games
Yes.
in the franchise. This one also feels a little like Pikmin to me, except whereas with Pikmin, they have been successful in like growing that franchise. Chibi Robo is just never like really connected.
Just kind of a non-entity. Even though like the last one they put out was on the 3DS one, right?
I think that's right.
And they released an amiibo with it too.
Yeah, Ziplash.
Yeah, that's right. But I really don't have anything else to say about it. Next up on the list is Donkey Konga. Mark, thank you for including my
tip
culture
of the hat
in this. And we'll leave it here, but like obviously it's something that just like languish. It's it's almost identical to the Pokemon Stadium thing in that there are 3 of them in Japan, 2 of them in the US, and that's kind of it stops here.
Up next is Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem.
Yeah.
Another game I've never played, but have always been interested in because of its reputation and its like kind of like psychological horror type thing.
And it is part of this like chip on its shoulder era of Nintendo where they were putting out games that were like more mature than like Nintendo was used to dealing with. We're going to talk about a couple of these on GameCube. And it's just kind of like weird fit. I don't really know if that's what this audience is asking for.
But I wonder if the game had sold really well,
sure,
like would Eternal Darkness have gotten a sequel? Like, was this an earnest attempt at a franchise?
That's a great question. I don't know.
I don't know either, but I lean towards yes.
Okay.
I lean towards this was the unsuccessful launch of a franchise. Dare I say this was the ARMS of the GameCube era.
Sure. I do think it's possible that someday we see a Eternal Darkness remake on Switch, and that it's bad is my guess. They fill it up with voice acting. The voice acting is no good. That's my guess. Next up on the list is Geist. This is another one of these like, oh my god, Nintendo trying to be like mature and like develop an idea that
and like
is
Western
adult.
focused.
Totally. This is a game where you play as like a marine dude who gets killed in the first mission, and then you play as his ghost, inhabiting other characters and animals and inanimate objects through the course of gameplay. At one point, you possess a shower head, so you can scare a woman and then possess her.
Who even knows with Geist? Like, this feels like...
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, I guess if it would have hit big, but it doesn't feel like franchise fodder to me.
Unless you want to consider Super Mario Odyssey as a Geist sequel, because it uses the capture mechanic. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And
that's a strong argument.
It's a strong argument. And the capture mechanic, or like the haunting mechanic in Geist, was something that Miyamoto came up with, right? Like that's some of the like, deep lore about the game Geist is that it's a Western studio working on it. And that like Miyamoto's like, what about this? And they're like, okay, great. And then they did it. And then Miyamoto was just like, I'm going to keep that in my back pocket for like 20 years from now. I can make Super Mario Odyssey.
Luigi's Mansion.
Yes.
Definitely a franchise.
Definitely a franchise starter.
But another one where it's like...
Took a while.
Yeah.
But like is absolutely now like another cornerstone of like what the Switch is. Starts here on GameCube.
Mario Superstar Baseball.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a franchise starter. We've seen like 2 other right. There's like All-Star Sluggers, Mario All-Star Baseball, whatever. There are a couple of different Mario baseball games. Not one on Switch, weirdly enough.
No.
But
I think the last one was on Wii.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Metroid Prime.
Yes. Breaking the spin-offs rule because it feels like Metroid Prime is in fact its own series. Not that we had that many of them. I guess if you count like its own spin-offs, we had 6.
Yeah.
And then we've got Metroid Prime 4 Beyond coming out at some point this year. But yeah, absolutely starts here. And it like hits the ground as you could argue is the same as what we were talking about with Geist and Eternal Darkness. That's like chip on their shoulder. Nintendo wants to be taken seriously, leaning into like Western development philosophy, having retro studios from Austin making this game. But it's just like it worked.
Yeah, it
is
worked.
the difference. Yeah.
Pikmin.
A franchise that I, of course, now love.
All right, I have Odama on
You
here.
do have Odama,
but I
on
don't
here.
really think it should be included.
Strike it from the list.
Yeah, this is the one that is basically like a pinball-esque game, and you could shout commands into.
Yes. It's a voice-activated pinball / real-time strategy game.
Yeah.
Which I don't think anyone understands.
And then Super Mario Strikers is the final GameCube
Yeah.
franchise starter I have here.
Another one where we only have like a handful of these games, right? But obviously there was one on Switch, and like there was a huge pop for it when it was announced. Maybe didn't end up being as exciting as people wanted it to be, but like, yeah, that's a real franchise starter.
So I would say a pretty strong showing from the GameCube.
I would say the biggest, like the biggest parts of this are obviously Animal Crossing, Luigi's Mansion, and Metroid Prime and Pikmin, right?
Right. Yeah, it is so interesting that like Pikmin, yes, it had multiple games on the GameCube, and Metroid Prime as well. But yeah, Luigi's Mansion, there was such a gap of, like a decade before it became a franchise that it's really only in hindsight that you can say that it got started there.
It's so and we've talked about this a couple times, but like Luigi's Mansion 2, sort of a soft reset. Like, yeah, it's a good game on 3DS, but like, yeah, it's missing some of the like continuous mansion exploration that we liked of the original. And like the remake of Luigi's Mansion on 3DS is another like kind of non-entity. But then 3 comes out and it's like, oh, now it's an undeniable force.
Yeah.
And yeah, like where the franchise becomes the franchise isn't until it comes out on Switch.
Yeah.
For number 3, and then 2 HD, which you and I loved. But yeah, that's it starts here on GameCube.
Moving on to the Nintendo DS.
Yes, a lot of DS games here.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Both this and the Wii have a lot of these like Pokemon Stadium type franchises where it's like we're gonna go big during the DS era and we're gonna go big during the Wii era, but then
we don't have a place.
We don't have a place
for them in the future. Yeah. So let's just run them down. So Nintendo DS. First, we've got Another Code / Trace Memory, which obviously got remade as Another Code Recollection on the Switch. We got to count this, right?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. It had 2 games. Up next is Art Academy, which is just like a whole series.
Yes.
Of games
on the DS.
Right.
Which I guess we have to count, but also like I never messed around with.
Yeah,
these.
me either.
After that, Big Brain Academy
and Brain Age, 2 different franchises.
Yes.
That made a ton of sense on the DS, but they've continued to make them since then. Like both of these had entries on the Switch.
Right, but Brain Age that did not come to the.
That's right.
To North America, and we believe that partially to be that like it's making claims about like medical claims about your brain by playing them, and that like the North American or American FDA was like no.
Or Nintendo's just trying to avoid any difficulty there,
impropriety. Next up, Clubhouse Games, which is on DS, and then we see it again in terms of 51 Worldwide Classics on Switch. Even in its original form, is kind of like this is just a collection of games, and like, would you almost kind of put like, what was it? Was it Wii Play, the one that came with a?
I think so.
Yeah, that also kind of feels like it's in this same series, sort of.
I don't know. I feel like Clubhouse Games is its own unique thing. But it also doesn't feel like a very strong franchise. Like I don't think people are really
franchise identity.
Yeah, I don't really feel like Clubhouse Games by itself is exciting. It's more just like a moniker that they've held onto when they're trying to collect these like board games or just like real life games.
Trying to find a way to sell you Go and Mancala and
right.
Connect 4, but you can't call it Connect 4.
Right.
So I don't know. Do you want to count this? There are a lot of these here where I'm like, do we count these?
I know. I know.
And
Well,
maybe we do. We just count them for now.
I think
and-
we do, but
yeah.
we just acknowledge that maybe they're not strong franchises.
Sure.
Like, maybe they're not. They're obviously not like a Pikmin or like an Animal Crossing.
Right.
Elite Beat Agents is on here,
Yeah. The game that we loved.
and in Japan
playing,
had multiple entries.
but just not here.
Fossil Fighters.
I don't really know anything about that, Mark.
To me, it seems like an attempt at a Pokemon like. You dig up fossils and then you birth the dinosaurs and the dinosaurs fight each other.
Here's the thing. I'm scrolling down the list and I do not see that we have Yokai Watch.
I
on
didn't
here.
put Yokai Watch on
Yeah.
there because that feels like a level 5 thing that Nintendo published, but is not really their
Yeah.
baby, because I don't have Professor Layton on here either for the same
that's
reason.
a good point, which also was published by Nintendo in the early days. But like the new one isn't gonna, the World of Steam, that's not being published by Nintendo.
It doesn't seem like it.
Let's get rid of Fossil Fighters just because I don't know what to do with it.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Tingle, the Tingle games.
I mean, I think we can try to kid ourselves and say that they're a series and that they try to launch them here, but like, I don't know. It feels like another just like weird Nintendo thing,
Right.
So I'm gonna cross it out, and also we never got them outside of Japan.
I think one of them was released in Europe. The first one was released in Europe.
All right.
But I think I think we can take it off the list.
Look, it hurts my heart a little bit to have to acknowledge that, but I think it's acknowledging the truth.
I think so too. Same with like we have Hotel Dusk Room 215 on here.
Right.
And this is another one where it's like, is it a franchise? It has multiple, like it has a sequel on the DS.
Yeah, but
yeah.
So I don't know. What do you think? Do you think we should keep that or take it off? Let's keep it. Let's keep it.
Yeah, I
It
feel
has
like it's
multiple
like
games on the
another
DS,
code. Like they are new IP that Nintendo introduced
right.
during the DS era. Rhythm Heaven.
Now let's discuss Rhythm Heaven. Yes. Definitely like a piece of Nintendo franchise ephemera that starts to show up in like Smash and like references to it in like WarioWare games. And there are multiple of these games. So like, yeah, it counts as a franchise.
It counts as a franchise. I feel like it's one of those franchises that is the victim of opportunity cost.
Sure.
Where, they were always kind of smaller titles that never sold incredibly well. And so I think Nintendo could afford to make that on like a GBA or DS budget.
Totally. Where it's not graphically intense and they can sell it for cheap and all that kind of stuff. But like, we just don't live in that world now.
Exactly.
But it counts. Next up, Nintendogs.
Another one that burned so bright.
And there were Nintendog games on 3DS, but I think just as like part of that opening salvo, and then they stopped doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love for there to be a new Nintendogs thing, especially, man, when they were making phone games. Like, where's my Nintendogs?
Right.
But counts as the beginning of a franchise. And again, this is just so DS-y, right? This is just like what the DS is about is Nintendogs.
Super Princess Peach.
Yeah.
I have on here, but I don't really know what to do with it. It doesn't feel like a real earnest attempt to make a spin-off franchise.
Right. Well, and obviously isn't followed up on by Nintendo ever, right? Like, you can argue that Princess Peach Showtime is like another bite at that apple, but it is not part of the same series.
Yeah.
Like, by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. Do you want to keep that one or do you want to lose it?
I feel like with like Geist, we keep it.
Sure. Okay.
It's
yeah,
just a failed franchise.
Yes, absolutely. And then Style Savvy.
I've never played any of these games, but there were multiple of them on the Nintendo DS, and they were very successful. I think this was a successful franchise.
I agree. But is also another like so very DS.
Yeah, and so when you look at the DS ones, there are some that were so successful, but didn't really make it out of the DS era.
Right. Like it's defining and like making important a style of game that only really works on DS, and then like kind of being trapped there. Like we're talking about Art Academy, Big Brain Academy, Brain Age, Clubhouse games, Nintendogs, Style Savvy are all like extremely Nintendo DS like games.
Yeah, I feel like looking at this list that the Nintendo DS era was not very successful at launching long-term
Right,
franchises,
right,
but it was really speaking to that audience that existed in that moment.
right. Well, and this is in like a pre-iPhone era, and like this type of game or this type of like software experience has almost certainly been replaced by what you're doing on your phone. I just said I wanted Nintendogs to be an iPhone game, and so like I think that's kind of what happened to this market.
Yeah.
Are you ready to move on to the Wii?
Kind of the same story, but I was surprised at how few new franchises were
Yes.
launched in the Wii era.
Yes. Kick us off, Mark.
Disaster Day of Crisis.
What is this?
Never released in America,
got
only
it.
released in Japan and Europe. Disaster Day of Crisis. And do you remember Project Hammer?
Yeah, sure.
So
Mhm.
Project Hammer was never released anywhere, but they were both like Nintendo attempts at kind of that GameCube, like
Chip on its shoulder.
chip on the shoulder type
Right.
thing that had really troubled development. And Project Hammer was eventually canceled. Disaster Day of Crisis came out in a few locations, but was poorly received. I think it is, I believe, basically like you are somebody who exists in the world and there is like some sort of tsunami or disaster, and then you are making your way through that world and have different like obstacles to overcome and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, a weird fit for the Wii. Next up is Endless Ocean, which we did see a sequel to, Endless Ocean Luminous on the Switch, and this is a very like this almost actually feels more like a DS game to me than a Wii game, right? Because it was like you're just swimming around an ocean in sort of a like stress-free environment, looking at fish.
Yeah. Kind of amazing that it has the Arika, the development team,
Right.
must have a real love for it. Because I can't think of any other reason why
Yeah.
they would have greenlit one for the Switch.
Well, I mean, other than I think the first one was like sold well, right? Like I do think that people have fond memories tied to the original Endless Ocean. It's just such a weird thing to have like not aged into. Like if they could, but it would be impossible, right? You were talking about like the opportunity costs of making like DS style games, whereas like you can make an Endless Ocean game for like a standard definition console where you're swimming around and seeing fish and like the distance isn't great, but you're like, it's the Wii, who cares? And like you put one out in 2023 or whenever that game came out. No,
Or
last
I think
year.
last year.
Yeah, that's right, because I had to buy it.
Yeah.
We had to buy it. I forgot we split it. But like if you're buying that game in 2024 and you can't see very far in the water because the draw distances are bad and the fish are like low poly models, it's just not going to be the same kind of exciting.
Yeah, I mean, so that was the third one because there was also a sequel on Wii. So
okay.
there have been 3 Endless Ocean games, but yeah, but I think you're right. I think it's one of those things where the budget and the sales aligned well on the Wii.
Right. And in a way that they physically can't.
Yeah.
Anymore.
Yeah.
Next up, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, which we now know is dead and dusted, but had a good long, not good, it had a long tenure of being a game that they would release every 2 years.
Mhm.
And then, there were like on and off periods, but, hitting those Winter Olympics.
And we
Summer
kind of take it
Olympics.
for granted now, but the idea that Sonic and Mario
It was
were going to be in a
revolutionary.
game
Yep.
together was a pretty big deal.
Next up, Sin and Punishment, which we punted to here.
Yep, not really much more to say about it.
Right. Then the Wii series. So many games that started with the word Wii. Sports, play, party, fit, music. All sort of, I mean, these are obviously different levels of success. Wii Sports being maybe the most fun to play and the most successful game.
Yeah, and the one I would
Came
say
with Wii's, yeah.
that persists in
this day, yeah.
like the popular memory as well. So much so that Nintendo Switch Sports
Right.
comes out as basically a sequel to Wii Sports and has sold like 15 million copies.
Right.
It's a formula that definitely works.
And if they want to like take another swing at any of these kinds of things, they have to just like totally change. Like you could argue that like Wii Fit is a like proto Ring Fit Adventure, but like they knew when it came time to do that, they just had to like change it entirely.
Right.
Right? They had to give it an intellectual property identity because it didn't really have one.
We did an episode on Wii Music way back in the early days of the
Yeah,
show.
probably like 2018.
But something that we said then, and I think is still very true, is that in some ways Wii Music was like ahead of its time, or really not ahead of its time. Really what it needed was social features.
Totally, yes.
Maybe because you can like create little videos, little like music videos and stuff, and those were fun and funny, but there was no real way to get them off your
It just died
Wii.
on your Wii. Yeah, that like there's a little video of you and me playing "Wake Me Up Before You Go," and I'm playing flute and you're playing like a harp or something, and it sounds awful, but like we're doing our best.
Right.
And yeah, would that be like a funny video to share? Like possibly, but how the heck are you gonna get it off your Wii?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is another thing that feels very much like the DS library. That
It's
we're
just
talking
so
about.
weird because it was so monstrously
So big.
successful.
Yes.
And then has no place in the future except for Wii Sports. Like Wii Sports really hit on something that was like fundamentally great about the Wii, which is that anybody can come in and pick this up and play it.
And sold Wiis,
Yeah.
right? Like just the experience of Wii Sports sold the thing. And the fact that it was boxed in with it helped. It's also why Wii Play was as successful as it was, is that it came bundled with an additional Wii remote. So like if you were going to buy a Wii remote anyway,
might as well get this game as
might
well.
as well get the game.
Finally, Xenoblade Chronicles.
Yeah, and sort of a like sleeper start to this series, Mark. We were talking about it on our news episode, that like this was one of those games that came to Japan first, and then like the sort of like hardcore gaming crowd, as it were like sort of adamant about like you should bring that to the West, and eventually Nintendo did, and like a franchise is born from that.
What I didn't include in here was like Pandora's Tower or The Last Story, which were also part of that quote unquote Project Rainfall.
Yes.
Games that people were agitating for Nintendo of America to release here. But Xenoblade Chronicles, I mean, definitely has taken on a life of its own in the Switch era.
Yeah, I mean, there's one coming out still. On Switch, there are 3 others that have come out on Switch, 2 of them being brand new. Kind of remarkable what that franchise has bloomed into.
Yeah, crazy that coming out of the Wii era, the 2 things that have persisted are Wii Sports and Xenoblade Chronicles.
Yeah, kind of like opposite ends of like when they were released on the system, and opposite ends of like what they're asking of the player, right? Is it like an easy drop in, drop out, your grandma can do it experience? Or is it a super deep RPG with systems that you never wrap your head around?
And then there's Endless Ocean there as well.
And I mean, to be fair to Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, just dead now, right?
Yeah.
Like it existed for a long time. Moving on to the Nintendo 3DS.
Codename Steam.
Codename Steam. Okay, right. What to say about Codename Steam? Obviously, we did not see another entry in this game. It is a like third-person turn-based strategy shooting game from Intelligent Systems, where the playable characters are notable figures from either American history, folklore, or literature, and the enemies are aliens that have invaded, and you are fighting them back on behalf of President Robot Lincoln. A weird game, a super fun, like bizarre thing, but like an absolute dead end for a potential series.
That one just feels like somebody had like a wild idea and just had to get it out.
Yes.
And, can now just be at peace.
Yes.
Since now that it's been released.
Mm-hmm. And I hope they feel at peace, because it's just a strange game.
Dylan's Dead Heat Breakers.
So I have to ask here, is that the first game in the franchise?
I think it's the first game in the franchise.
So there's Dylan's Rolling Western in 2012.
Okay. That could be the first one.
I think that's the first one.
Okay.
But 2012 would be, then we probably should have mentioned it on
No, I think it's a 3DS
it's
game.
a 3DS. Yeah, you're right. weird games here. This is another, like, it's a kind of a combination of like a racing game and strategy game. He plays like an armadillo in a like post-apocalyptic Wild West. That's Dylan. A bizarre game, and the only thing I really have to say about it is um, it will take Miis that are on your 3DS and turn them into animal characters that then appear in your game and with the names that you've given those Miis. And I had made an Andy Daly, the comedian Andy Daly of the TV show Review. I had made an Andy Daly Mii because I was making his characters from Comedy Bang Bang into Mii fighters on my 3DS. And so there was once a time playing Dylan's Dead Heat Racers where I walked up to a little mouse that looked like Andy Daly and he said, "Hi, I'm Andy Daly." So that's I recommend that experience, but otherwise Dylan's is a hard recommend.
Ever Oasis.
Yes.
This is an RPG that was released late in the 3DS's life in 2017. Just had the bad fortune of releasing after the Switch was released.
Yeah,
when everybody stopped caring about the 3DS.
Could have been a franchise starter though, for sure. Next up, Kid Icarus Uprising. An interesting inclusion, as Kid Icarus has existed 2 other entries before.
Yep.
But this game is a whole new,
like, radical reinvention. What Kid Icarus could be.
Right, and is for this game. But could have been many other times.
Mm-hmm.
And is it just that Masahiro Sakurai is like he must be involved for the game to work or to like actually come out, and like they had to make him make Smash?
I think the game is just too weird.
Sure.
I think the game is too weird, was saddled with like
crazy controls
on hardware that it doesn't really make sense to be on.
Right.
I think it's just it's kind of a minor miracle that it exists at all.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, let's keep it there as a potential franchise starter. A lot of these are just potential, and
I don't think the 3DS was super successful.
I don't
in
think so
launching new Nintendo franchises.
Although I have a possible suggestion, but you can shoot it down when we get there. So Miitopia is next on the list. Miitopia got remade, of course, on Switch, but that's kind of it, right? This is a sort of like goof around, funny time JRPG where your characters are Miis. I guess in the same way I was just praising Dylan's Dead Heat Racers for having a little mouse named Andy Daly who says to me, "Hi, I'm Andy Daly." That probably would have happened in Miitopia.
That probably could have happened in Miitopia.
Yeah.
Yep. Also, Miitopia to me feels like kind of an expansion of what they were doing with the Street Pass games.
And it's also like it's so contingent on you having a bunch of Miis on your system, which like was no problem on the Wii, and then you could transfer them over to the 3DS, just because like people got around and like played Wii games together, and so like you would make a Mii, and making a Mii was sort of fun and funny, and people would laugh while doing it, and that's just like that's not how we interact with those creations anymore, which is like kind of a bummer. But just Miitopia doesn't. It's weird to me that that's on Switch when I'm like...
Feels like it would take so much work
to
make it fun.
How many Miis do I have on my Switch? Like, 1?
Yeah.
2? I don't know.
Steel Diver.
Yes. Do you want to control a submarine?
You can.
You can.
I've never played Steel Diver.
Neither have I.
Yeah, I've never played Steel Diver.
I never will.
I have no interest in playing Steel Diver.
But a potential franchise starter for sure. And then last on our list here is Sushi Strikers: The Way of the Sushido.
Oh, this game bums me out for whatever reason.
It is a bummer of a game. And really, it seems like something that they just did not have a release strategy for, because it came out simultaneously,
I think, on 3DS and Switch. And really only makes sense on the 3DS.
Yes, correct. Yeah. And it's just a weird like puzzle game with like lots of story elements.
I only ever played the demo.
Me too. And also like there were I described it as a puzzle game, but like you have to do it fast. And I also don't know if there was like any real finesse or strategy to it. You just like threw sushis around, right?
There must have been some sort of strategy, but I never bothered to wrap my head around it.
Okay, and then so that's the end of the list as we have it. What do you think about including the Mario 3D
I was thinking about that, like 3D Land
Yeah, which then
being
becomes
the
3D
start.
World.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think that's the only thing. I debated also about like, oh, well, do you put like new Super Mario Brothers
right,
on the
right.
Nintendo DS? I feel like the reason
It's all just
no
Mario.
there is because
Yeah.
no on New Super Mario Brothers because it's just 2D Mario.
Yeah, okay, I agree. I
But
agree with
3D
philosophically.
Land is a unique like perspective, literally,
Right.
on the Mario franchise. But we didn't count Galaxy. I don't know. I
We
don't
didn't
know how
count
to handle all that
Galaxy. We
stuff.
didn't count 64. Like I feel like Mario is just its own thing,
Yeah.
and like they all go in together. So, and you know, we're talking about franchises here, but like the question is sort of the original question is posed by Tux DX, DC, sorry, is like new IP, right? And like Mario 3D Land isn't new.
Yeah, that's
IP.
true.
It's just a new franchise within the same IP.
Well, as far as new IP goes, the Nintendo 3DS had a fair amount, but I would say they were basically all strikeouts.
Dead in the water, yeah. And nothing that we mentioned has a sequel on anything else. Next up, the Wii U, Mark. We're talking Wii U.
We're talking Wii U.
Starting with Captain Toad Treasure Tracker.
Another one where it's like, should this be on here? Does this count as its own franchise?
It's definitely yeah. That's a great point because it is just Toad, right?
It's just
like,
Toad.
And so like it doesn't really, but it does introduce like new priorities. Like it almost feels like a Metroid Prime in that way. Mind you, it has no sequels. It has like 2
re-releases
on 3DS and Switch. But like
I think it's fair to include it on
there.
there.
I think so too.
It's like a list of new IP, new franchises, but yeah. Devil's Third.
Sure.
It's in the vein of Bayonetta, where like the Bayonetta revival was successful on Wii U. It's not included on this list because Bayonetta was an existing franchise. It feels like Devil's Third was kind of a Nintendo Hail Mary, like why not? Why not pick up this game?
Right.
What is the name of the developer? Itagaki or something like that? Like he is the one who was part of like the Team Ninja team that developed the Ninja Gaiden reinventions on the Xbox.
Sure.
And started his own company, Valhalla Studios. I'm like half remembering all of this.
Yes.
But then this game was in development hell forever, and then Nintendo finally picked it up for release on the Wii U, which like, was a surprising choice.
Right.
And I wouldn't say really paid off.
And you nailed it with Itagaki.
Okay, but maybe in the relationship, that Nintendo has with them.
Right. Next on the list is Hyrule Warriors.
I counted it just because it was the start of like Nintendo having that Muso relationship.
And there is a sequel. There's a second Hyrule Warriors game, right? And I mean, not just the definitive edition on 3DS and Switch, which has so much additional content that like they may as well be new games. But the Age of Calamity take on it, which is like a way for them to be like, please pretend it's Breath of the Wild for just like a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I think it totally counts.
But why you would count this and not Fire Emblem Warriors? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point, but
we know when we see it.
But yeah, we know
and
when
we're
we see
calling
it.
it.
That's right. That's right. Next up, NES Remix.
This is one that I wish was more of a franchise.
I agree, and would almost kind of argue that like Nintendo World Championships NES Edition is part of this franchise. Even though it has a different name, it's still like repackaging NES experiences in like little bite-sized things with like flashy graphics and like lots of fun sound and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I really like the NES remix games quite a bit. And again, bundled together, there were 2 of them on Wii U as like little individual releases, and then bundled together and re-released on 3DS. So like definitely the start of a franchise.
Up next is Nintendo Land.
Yeah.
And this was the equivalent to me of Nintendo's attempt at a Wii Sports like experience for the Wii U.
Right.
Where it's like, here's a gamepad, and this is what the gamepad is for. This is why the gamepad is cool.
Right. And so, but like, do you think I think this would be a hard sell as the start of a franchise, right? Unless it was super successful, I guess, then they would have to revisit the idea. But like, I don't know. I don't think we're ever going to see another Nintendo Land, right?
No, I don't think so either. But I think it's arguably Like it is new IP.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it's new IP, but it's new IP that is like sampling other IP,
That's
right?
true. Yeah. It's
But
like
then again, so is
remixing other
Smash.
IP.
So is Smash.
Uh-huh. I think we count it.
We count it. Okay, great. Next up, Splatoon.
Hands down,
Yeah,
for sure, the most successful new Nintendo franchise, new IP of the last 15 years.
yeah, totally. Super successful on the Wii U. Comes out with a sequel within the first year of Switch, which becomes this like dominating force, uh, especially in Japan, but like also worldwide, right? Like the game is not just a Japanese thing; it's everywhere. And then 3 was really big as well. So like,
Yeah, Splatoon is another like has become a premier franchise
yes,
in Japan. Like when I went to the Nintendo stores in Japan, like they have on their like merchandise that
Yep.
has
There are
like
4
Nintendo
things.
characters. There's 4
Yes.
things. There's Mario, there's Zelda, there's Animal
Animal
Crossing,
Crossing.
and there's Splatoon. And then it, like on the expanded one, they have additional things.
Right.
But it's like those are the 4.
Those
That
are
is
the,
what.
those are the core 4
Yeah.
right there. So congratulations to the Wii U on that one. Next up is Super Mario Maker, which of course we already established is the sequel to Mario Paint.
Is a sequel to Mario Paint, and also in the same way that Super Mario RPG spun off franchises,
Right.
became its own franchise
100%.
with Super Mario Maker 2.
But in such a weird that Super Mario Maker 2 is like is a game that has more features in it, undeniably, and is on a platform with a bigger player base.
You could create your own like Super Mario World type game. Like you could string levels together and share it.
Of course, you couldn't do that when it launched. It took like a year for those features to be added, maybe longer, right? I mean, regardless, Mario Maker 2, a much smaller cultural moment than the original Super Mario Maker, and I'm really not sure why. I think some of it has to do with the creation tools being all controller based. Whereas like the Wii U, you always had the gamepad to like sort of help you scribble stuff out on it.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that's probably a large reason why it didn't take off in the same way.
There was also just like Nintendo was very cool and fun about like celebrating the designs of the original Super Mario Brothers when Super Mario Maker 1 came out. The copy that I have like came with like a little book that like included the hand drawn like level layouts
That's
for
so cool.
Super Mario Brothers and like on grid paper and like all that stuff is so rad, so fun,
and so rarely seen. They so rarely share any of that stuff.
Right.
You're right. Super Mario Maker was, and I think there was also something to Super Mario Maker being first.
Yeah, totally.
You know, like it was the first of its kind, and then Super Mario Maker 2 is just the sequel.
Right.
More of it.
Yep. But undeniably a franchise starter. Mark, you have here Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE.
Another one I just didn't know what to do with. It's really, like 2 franchises coming together to create one new experience. Was it ever meant to be more than that? I don't know.
I don't think so. Well, it's also like it is Spin-off City USA, right?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Probably Spin-off City
Japan. Yeah.
And is, of course, a sort of mashup of Fire Emblem and the Persona games, right? So, like, it is one Nintendo property, and then, like, Atlas, which is Sega.
Yeah, so maybe we don't. So maybe we don't count it.
Maybe it's just a continuation of the Mario versus Sonic games. Have we ever considered
that? That makes the most sense, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that absolutely makes the most sense. I'm striking it through, and then
yes.
Finally, the Wonderful 101.
Yeah.
They did.
Did Nintendo publish it?
Nintendo did publish it because when Platinum Games during the Switch era crowdfunded a remaster, like they took over ownership of it. However, that worked out between them. But yes, at the time it was a Nintendo like published.
Gotcha.
Game.
So do we count that?
I think we count it. I mean, we're gonna have to answer this question in the Switch era as well with things like Daemon X Machina and Astral Chain. But I think we count it.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So just to review it, we got Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, Devil's Third, Hyrule Warriors, NES Remix, Nintendo Land, Splatoon, Super Mario Maker, and the Wonderful 101. I mean, it's a recent thing, but like a lot of these are like present in what Nintendo is now.
Do you think so? I was gonna say besides Splatoon.
I guess nothing like devastatingly big, but like Splatoon is, as we said, like one of the 4 pillars of Nintendo now.
Right. And you could argue that like the Hyrule Warrior stuff, like those Muso games,
Yeah.
although it's been a while since
Yeah,
we've
that's
had
true.
one.
That's true.
But we had a ton in the Switch generation.
Mm-hmm.
And then Super Mario Maker had a sequel, but
Yeah, just kind of like a quieter sequel. Nintendo World Championships. Like I said, I made that argument. And then Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, I think, was probably a pretty small footprint on Switch as well. So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I just got excited about the Splatoon showing up here.
should we move on to Switch?
Well, let's move on to the Switch. Now, Mark, of course, we did not discuss the Virtual Boys.
We didn't.
Because I think there's only one. No, actually, there's several new IP games on there, right? Tellero Boxer.
Yeah.
A game we can't talk about.
Uh-huh. Mario's Tennis is technically,
Sure.
like that was one where it's like, well, Mario Tennis is new on the Nintendo 64 if you don't count Mario's Tennis on the Virtual Boy.
Right.
Which we did not.
Yeah. I'm sorry I brought it up.
But we did. We memory hold the Virtual Boy for sure.
Just as we are not we're not bringing up the phone either, because of course we would have to talk about. Come on, what's the name of that game?
Yes. Dragalia Lost.
Dragalia Lost. We would have to talk about.
Yeah,
Dragalia
we would have
Lost,
had
but
to.
We are not.
But we're not.
All right, Switch. New IP, new franchises on the Switch. We got to talk about 1-2 Switch.
Yeah, despite seemingly everybody's best wishes, this did become a franchise.
It became a franchise. The original game sold more than 1 million copies. We have to acknowledge it.
Yep.
It's a franchise starter.
It's a franchise starter.
And then the second one is a franchise killer. So,
ARMS.
Yes.
Now, ARMS is one that it is conceivable to me that in the future we get an ARMS thing.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Or like in the same world, or
yeah. I mean, there is so much design in that game, right? There is a world. There are characters. Can you tell stories in that world? I don't know. But
wasn't there going to be a series of graphic novels that eventually got canceled?
Yes, that is correct. That's right. I forgot about those. But yeah, so I think it totally counts as a potential franchise starter, and we're really just at the time will tell on that.
Yeah,
one.
it sold close to 3 million. I just looked it up. I think close to 3 million copies. So not a disaster. And like you said,
a little bit of a it's been out for 8 years,
right?
It does not have a long tail.
But interesting that Min Min showed up in Smash Brothers,
right?
Yes, maybe somebody at Nintendo has a fire burning for this, and we'll see ARMS show up in some other way in the future.
You brought them both. The next two of these you brought up in the same breath before when we were talking about Devil's Third, I believe. But Astral Chain and Daemon X Machina, which Astral Chain was a Platinum developed game,
and
right?
so was Daemon X Machina.
They're both Platinum games.
I think so.
Astral Chain was for sure. Mark is looking up Daemon X Machina right now. But both of these also kind of fit under the chip on its shoulder.
Oh, I was wrong. Marvelous. Okay. Developed by Marvelous.
Got it. For Daemon X Machina.
Yep.
That they're trying to be like the rest of the third party games out. Still very Japanese. But just going for something a little bit off the beaten path of Nintendo franchises.
Yeah, and whether they were ever intended to be or not, I don't think we'll ever. Well, I guess maybe Daemon X Machina, because that was done by Marvelous.
Yeah.
Potentially, maybe.
Could
back. See a sequel, but Astral Chain, Platinum seems
done.
Basically over. So
what's interesting, and weirdly, you and I didn't play either of these games, right? I messed around with the Daemon X Machina demo.
I also messed around with the demo, yeah.
And I bet we would probably like Astral Chain. I bet it would be at least fun for a little while. I know that people who like mech games do get something out of Daemon X Machina. So, who knows? That could be something that could come back. Both of them, I think, definitely fall under the category of franchise starter.
And then Labo.
Right. And is Labo a franchise or just a phenomenon? Do you know what I mean? It's just a thing that they tried.
Yeah. Is it? Because there were a series of Labo releases.
Yes. 4 of them.
But they're not sequels really. They're just more Labo.
It's hard to even really consider them games, even though they all like include a game component to them.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, it's
they're
really
more like crafts. It's like a project.
yes,
It's
that's
like
right.
Lego.
Yes,
Is
that's right.
Lego a game?
Right. And if so, do we need to include Mario Legos on this as its own system?
But I do feel like Labo was the attempt to start something more like
yeah.
like could we, if Labo had been a huge success, would they have continued to make new Labo kits?
Right.
But it also feels like there's diminishing returns there. Like at some point, it doesn't feel very Nintendo to just be
just be cranking these things out.
Yeah.
I also wonder like how much like just engineering know-how and like brain power it takes to put one of those things together. Right?
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine the amount of iteration and prototyping that goes in.
Yeah.
Like how many Labo ideas were discarded
Absolutely.
before they came up with the ones they did.
And then you try to sell these things to kids for $80, you know?
Right,
like,
right.
It seems like one of those things where like we were discussing before that like the opportunity cost is just like it's so much, would take so much work to have something that then like how many people are buying.
And at that point in the Switch's life, like 2018, they were so invested in new ways to play with Switch.
Right.
And they kind of like dropped that thread. It didn't become as big of a talking point as the Switch just continued to gain momentum as a gaming system.
Right. As they're like, oh, you know what? The biggest selling games on this thing are Animal Crossing and Mario Kart and Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey and Smash Brothers. Games that are just games that you play with controllers. So I don't know. What do you want to do with this one?
Well, it's undeniably a new IP.
Sure.
But, you know, whether it was a successful franchise starter, I would say no.
Right. And you have sort of as a sub point here the Game Builder Garage, which, you know, is sort of just an extension of the Labo Garage that was included in all of the Labo kits where you can like make your own programming experiences. In the Labo version, it was all interacting with like custom made Labo stuff. So you would apply your own engineering genius to it. And that's also what Game Builder Garage was, but just all included within like the game logic.
Up next, I had Nintendo World Championship NES Edition on here.
Strike it. I think it's part of the NES Remix series.
Well, that means, unfortunately, we must mention Princess Peach Showtime.
We got to mention Princess Peach Showtime, a game that bummed us both out.
Just a disappointment.
Yeah. Would that it were more fun.
But new IP, kind of.
We've talked about this before, but it's disappointing that like this is a way forward game.
No, it's Good Feel.
Good Feel, that's right. And like it's clear that it's just like a Good Feel designed and executed game. Starting like a new Princess Peach idea, and it's like I really wish Nintendo had set a template for this.
Yeah,
and then like let Good Feel riff on that. Because then they'll do something like Kirby's Epic Yarn or Woolly World, Yoshi's Woolly World, which are them iterating on Nintendo designs or HAL designs.
Yep.
And those are more successful games than Princess Peach Showtime.
Ring Fit Adventure.
Yep.
Massively successful.
Yes.
Completely new IP. One that so far Nintendo has not shown any interest in following up on.
Yeah, but I would imagine that we will see a Ring Fit Adventure 2 or some other take on it for Switch 2, right? Because like I would think that the new Joy-Con won't work in the old Ring-Con because it is rail based. So yeah, I fully suspect that we will see, if not Ring Fit Adventure 2, then like whatever Fit Adventure.
Yeah, this is one I feel like is ripe for a new idea on Switch 2, because Ring Fit Adventure will still be playable on Switch, and I wonder if they have like learned anything from what I would call the diminishing returns of Wii Fit, where it's just like maybe it is better to just do one of these.
Yeah,
you know, like sell it forever,
right?
And then we'll come up with something new to fill that fitness niche.
Yeah,
on the next franchise.
The next round. Yeah, that totally
console.
Makes sense. Also, of course, we got the great character of Drago.
Yes,
the hunky like gym rat dragon.
Dragon, yeah.
Who is your opponent?
And
yeah.
when for Valentine's Day a few weeks ago, when we did the casting of Disney movies, in the Discord, people were talking about how Drago would be a perfect Gaston.
Right.
And yes, spot on.
We missed that one.
Yep.
What did we say? Handsome Wario? I still think that's good casting.
Finally, I have Mario plus Rabbids on here, and I don't really know how we want to handle this because I think it was even published by Ubisoft.
Yes, I believe that's true. But they made 2 of them, and like it features Mario characters, and the characters of Rabid Peach and Rabid Mario are 2 of our favorites. So yeah, I say keep them.
Yeah,
I say keep it.
But this feels like a Super Mario Maker type thing where
the first one
you're like, oh wow, I can't believe this is good. But then the second one is just a little.
You're like, first of all, I can't believe this exists. Second of all, I can't believe it's good. And then the second one just comes out.
Right. And it's like, oh,
I'm sure it's fine.
I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah. So just to review the new franchises for Switch: 1-2 Switch, ARMS, Astral Chain, Daemon X Machina, Labo / Game Builder Garage, Princess Peach Showtime, Ring Fit Adventure, and Mario plus Rabbids.
So crazy to me that with how successful the Switch is, I don't really consider any of these like franchise launchers.
With the exception of Ring Fit Adventure, where I'm like, we will see another one of these, is sort of how I feel. But yeah, everything else, I'm like, yeah, I don't know that we carry any of the rest of this into the future with us.
Yeah,
possibly ARMS, but like everybody 1-2 Switch killed that franchise.
Yeah, it really puts into like it's not like they didn't introduce new stuff. It's just that there was the generation of all of the other things that Nintendo does, like hitting big. Like Zelda hitting big,
right.
Mario hitting big, Mario Kart hitting big.
Well, so, we started this conversation by talking about the Super NES and it being the sort of realization for a lot of franchises, the realization of what you couldn't do in 8-bit, now you can do in 16-bit. And I feel like the Switch in a lot of ways has been the same thing, but just holistically for all of Nintendo, right? Like, this is where you can get the definitive Kirby experience, the definitive Smash Brothers experience, the definitive Mario Kart experience, the definitive Zelda experience, the definitive Mario experience in Mario Odyssey. It's just like, this is the Super Nintendification of all the Nintendo franchises up to this point.
It makes the Switch 2 so scary.
I know, because what do you do?
Yeah.
It can't be the same thing. Maybe it can be the same thing again. What do I know? But like, I sort of feel like maybe they go back to these other franchises that were like, hey, you haven't picked up Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, Kid Icarus Uprising, or what else here? Nintendogs, or
like Donkey Kong, a Donkey Kong
Country,
platformer,
right? Or Eternal Darkness. Like, go back, grab these franchises that like were started somewhere and never got this like perfect moment of like perfect expression, and do those on the Switch too.
And it could work like we saw with Luigi's Mansion 3, where that franchise really came into its own. And before that was kind of like a B-tier franchise.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Or they got to start making new stuff.
And either way, it's going to be wild. Switch 2 is going to be wild.
Switch 2 is going to be wild. And we already know that like there's going to be another take on Mario Kart, right? Will there be some like weirdo gimmick, or is this just another Mario Kart?
Yeah.
Like, we don't know. We don't know. It's an exciting time to be just in this space. All right, Mark, let's close this out. All right, that is going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Did we leave any new franchises out? I don't know. I feel like we got them all.
We probably did. I mean, to be completely honest, we probably forgot something.
We probably forgot something. But let us know. Hop in that Discord. Email us Nintendo Cartridge Society
at gmail.com.
And that is going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Thank you so much to our 16-bit patrons, Connor McCabe, Patrice Millette, Kyle Seaborn, and Drew Mackey. I
just want to follow up on this because we should know this, and you did know it, and I had it wrong. It is for sure called Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island in the US.
Yes.
And I think just called Yoshi's Island in Japan.
Okay, but I was confident about the first part of it. It was the second part that it's only called Yoshi's Island in Japan that I couldn't determine from a quick Google.
Okay.
Are you in that same boat now?
I am, but hold on. Let's cut this. Let me not like cut it.
We're gonna
take a quick break. We're gonna figure it out,
All right.
and we're gonna know our information when we come back.
Okay, great. All right, Mark, what do we know?
Okay, we know that in Japan, Super Mario World had the Super Mario Brothers 4 subtitle.
Right. Or Super Mario Brothers 4 Super Mario World.
Yes.
Right.
And
yes,
that in Japan, Yoshi's Island was just called Super Mario Yoshi's Island.
Or just Yoshi Island.
Maybe just Yoshi Island.
But
we're close. We're so close.
We're so close. We're so close that like the things are like a little bit different.
But the part that we know for sure,
right, is that it is a Super Mario game. Regardless of, but it's still the beginning of the franchise.
And it's not a sequel to World in Japan.
Right.
That's the important part.
That's an important part.
right. That's unimportant part for our episode, which was about start of new franchises, which means that we were definitely correct for putting Yoshi's Island in the Super Nintendo as a new franchise.
Anthony DeLuca made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Ellers saying thank you for listening.